Hi there and welcome to this webinar, Contract Audit, the Power of Prevention by PRGX. This is the second webinar in this week's eSummit series on uncovering revenue with contract compliance. You can register for our upcoming webinars on the PRGX Bright Talk channel. Before we begin, firstly, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please submit these using the question box and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. Please also check your audio. If you're having any trouble hearing us, please let us also know in the question box. And lastly, be sure to follow us on our social channels, Twitter and LinkedIn, by searching PRGX Global. So to get started, I would like to introduce both of our speakers today. John Daniels, VP of Audit Operations, has worked for PRGX, leading service delivery to some of North America's largest clients. Having started in recovery audit in 2001, and working across multiple industry verticals, he brings 35 years of industry experience and offers extensive supplier contract audit expertise. Sarah Clark, PRGX Director of Product Development, started her career around 20 years ago focusing on business intelligence and application development, engaging a core focus on people, process and technology. Sarah joined the contract compliance team 12 years ago and brings extensive in product and process knowledge. Together they offer valuable insight, bringing many years of industry experience from the operations, product and service delivery areas. At this time, I'll now hand over to John and Sarah.
Great, thank you Ashley, and welcome everybody. Our agenda today is going to focus on contract audit to power prevention. We'll start with understanding the industry trends, shifting the focus from reactive to proactive, which will enable organizations to supercharge their results. And we'll finish with some actionable next steps. So when we think about trends, John, you and I, we've been working together for almost 12 years, and the industry has changed quite a bit during that period of time. As you go out and you meet your many clients across various industries, what have the discussions been like in the evolving workspace?
Sarah, gosh, has it really been 12 years? Oh my, time really does fly. To your question, without a doubt, the evolutionary thinking I'm hearing most in the trenches is that clients are demanding more value from their audit programs. They know it's out there, it's been too long underdeveloped, and they want to begin to capitalize on it. So there's definitely clear trends that we're seeing with our more enlightened customers. Where we're seeing an evolution, it's mostly clients getting more proactive in addressing the root causes of the errors. Bottom line, they want to get a jump on the problems. They want to get them fixed and stop the leakage sooner rather than later. And they're doing this by evolving their audit program focus, historically from a central recovery motivation to one where error correction and prevention takes center stage. Not to diminish the importance of recovery, though. It's always been important, and it still remains that way, especially for use as a funding source for all the future cost savings opportunities that these programs provide. So on top of that, there's a lot of interest in understanding and incorporating new and developing technology. For example, at PRGX here, we're on the cutting edge of technology development and contract audit, and these impacts are just starting to take hold. We expect technology to fundamentally change the business in the coming years. And finally, our most forward-thinking clients are embracing the importance of investing in the maturity of their audit program capabilities. These companies realize that two similar companies performing the same work can achieve significantly different results based on their program management maturity. And underperforming programs are not an option. They want the full benefit. So it's a lot, but it's also very exciting to see because PRGX has long been a firm believer that audit programs are well positioned to make even bigger impacts on our clients' organizations going forward. These evolving trends, when adopted, set the stage for supercharged results for clients' contract audit programs.
And I'm glad you touched on technology. Being in our product development group, we've heard from clients how difficult it is to manage their programs, track their KPIs, and leverage past learnings in building new programs with the technology options that they have available, which is why we've been investing heavily in new tools for our teams and clients.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Sarah. But I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. For the others on the line, PRGX is in the midst of work on two separate but related system development paths. The first one is our audit program management tool we call Panoptic. And this tool helps to manage, track, and facilitates virtually every aspect of running a complex, multifaceted contract audit program. And for those of you who've been involved in these programs in the past, you know how challenging that can be at times. So the Panoptic is really designed to help us with planning, to work papers, from workflows to communications management. And last but not least, it represents a robust repository of all that rich data and historical supplier and contract information that we develop through the course of an audit program. The second path of development is our contract intelligence initiative. Here we're in the process of building tools which will automate the ingestion, extraction, normalization, and analysis of vast amounts of contract data. We're using artificial intelligence and machine learning in this area, and these tools will allow us to exponentially expand the coverage and value we can deliver through our contract audit service line. So while these features are certainly going to be beneficial to the PRGX audit teams, they're also going to enable our clients to benefit from this same technology. As cloud-based applications, these tools will be easily accessible to clients to use in whatever manner they see fit. And in fact, in some cases, we are incorporating client build partner insights and requests to make sure these tools are addressing the needs of our clients as well. So I think, Sarah, you can see that technology is poised to take contract audit programs to a much higher level of sophistication in the coming years, and we're excited about the opportunity tech will enable.
Absolutely, John. It is exciting to see how much contract compliance solutions have evolved and continue to evolve. Now, many of us on the phone are familiar with traditional contract compliance audits. So this slide, we talk about next generation commercial compliance. Can you explain what's meant by that?
Sure, I think you're probably right that most folks on the line know something about traditional contract compliance audits. But for those who may not, the audit approach, the traditional approach, typically has a central objective of historical recovery and a secondary objective related to addressing underlying root causes of problems. Unfortunately, what we've learned over the years is all too often the corrective action focus is not given enough emphasis or follow-through. And more often than not, this results in some lost value opportunity. And then when that's coupled with the fact that typically, 50 to 75% loss can occur in collections of historical recoveries, and that happens because these audits are usually conducted well after the fact, typically 2 to 4 years in arrears. And we all know that, contracts can be poorly written or interpretive in nature, so that creates doubt as to the actual intent, and just a whole myriad and variety of other factors that come into play that diminish the ability to fully realize recoveries on these historical claims. So it's important to emphasize that traditional compliance auditing still has a lot to offer, but you can see that there's some aspects of it that are misaligned and maybe not fully hitting the nail directly on the head in providing the full complement of value that they could be. And that's really where the new next generation compliance auditing comes into play. This is an expanded service which is intended to overcome the shortcomings of traditional contract compliance audit and deliver far greater value in the long run. And here's how it works. First, we evolved to a prevention-focused mindset, one where corrective action becomes a central objective, equal to the historical recovery objective. And by taking this more proactive approach and accelerating timelines wherever possible, and also by incorporating new, more targeted methodologies, which are designed to address the blind spots of traditional compliance auditing, and then incorporating some of that technology that we talked about earlier to reach broader and deeper than ever before was possible. And then, not to diminish the fact that we also spend a lot of time on capturing the learnings and educating, feeding those learnings back into our customers' organizations to educate, the procurement teams and operations folks to understand why problems occur and how they can avoid them in the future. And when we package all this together, this is really what we at PRGX call next generation commercial compliance auditing.
That makes a lot of sense, John. As I'm looking at the chart, can you explain why it is that commercial compliance auditing can deliver 5 times as much value as traditional compliance audits?
Well, sir, in commercial compliance auditing, we measure success on the total value proposition. That's the value the program delivers in the combined historical cost recoveries, but also in the future cost savings resulting from audit-initiated corrective actions. So when evaluating that against the traditional compliance auditing, where we're focused primarily on recoveries, and as we discussed, there can be significant reductions in actual recoverable values out of historical claims, oftentimes 50 to 75% of identified leakage. There's a good return there, but it's limited. So when comparing what the next generation commercial compliance auditing can deliver against the historical recoveries, but also the corrective actions which are realized at virtually 100% of their value once implemented, then it's hard not to see how 3 years of future cost savings can easily return well over 5 times the total value.
Wow. It sounds like there's a lot of benefit we can get by moving into the next generation contract compliance audits. So looking at this slide, it seems you're making a comparison between traditional focus and total commercial focus. Can you explain what you mean by that?
We've already talked a fair bit about these variations on contract audit services, but this slide helps to further contrast the coverage each one of these variations provides. As most on the phone probably know, a traditional compliance audit evaluates the vendor billing history against the procurement contract with a primary deliverable of historical recoveries, as we discussed. And that's what's shown here in this middle oval. We call that the traditional focus. And actually, as I said, this remains a fundamental part of both service alternatives, since there are many lessons to be learned from this viewpoint. But unfortunately, we know that this approach is not all-encompassing, and there are several known blind spots. In particular, there is usually little focus on leakage that results from root causes originating in operations or finance in a traditional audit, 2 very important functional departments when it comes to billing and payment error prevention. Here's an example. It's common knowledge that an invoice, when broken down into its most simplistic form, multiplies price times quantity to arrive at the amount due. But what you may not know is that quantity is often something that's very difficult to ensure accuracy on in a traditional compliance audit. 80% of compliance audit test procedures focus on the price side of the billing equation and 20% on quantity. Most certainly, this is a limitation of contract compliance auditing and calls for a specialized audit approach focused on quantity assurance to improve billing accuracy. Commercial compliance auditing expands the visibility aperture, moving beyond the narrow focus on contracts and vendors, and includes review of high-risk elements of operation and finance as well. So commercial compliance auditing is still rooted in traditional contract audit, but extends both coverage and methodology to address other sources of leakage.
John, I'm glad you brought up quantity assurance. It's more than just confirming a timesheet to hours billed or inventory logs to equipment billed. It often includes confirming if the person or the equipment was actually on site. Are there flight or transportation manifests, hotel logs, safety logs, and so forth that demonstrate the individual material was really there, along with many other complexities to validating quantity? Now, circling back to the specialized audit techniques, can you share a few examples with us on how these fit in?
Sure. An example of a pre-event audit, in this case, a prepayment audit. I'll use an example that PRGX is actively engaged in performing right now. So the situation is one where our client is engaged in constructing a multi-billion-dollar, multi-year major capital project. Every month, tens if not hundreds of millions of dollars of invoices are submitted for payment. These invoices are not only very large, but very complex and subject to error. Our auditors work on site to evaluate invoices for contract compliance prior to approval and payment. To date, we've identified millions in billing retractions as a result. This is an extremely proactive approach, and you can see how this will return 100% of value leakage rather than the traditional audit, which is done years after the fact. Another example is what I call real-time auditing. In this case, live field auditing. We recently finished one of these engagements as well. The situation was there was a major plant turnaround, which is a concentrated period of heavy maintenance during a plant shutdown. Turnarounds can be very chaotic work environments due to the large number of contractors brought on site in a short period of time. This chaotic work environment is ripe for abusive billing practices. Controls tend to go out the window. So we put auditors on site, boots on the ground, so to speak, to watch, question, correct, validate, and reconcile, all pointing to ensuring accuracy in the invoice amounts. Certainly the compliance improved as a direct result of our work, but also, just as importantly, because contractors knew they were being watched. So you can see this is just another example of very proactive approach, trying to get ahead of the curve to make sure invoices are submitted accurately to begin with.
John, you mentioned the boots on the ground approach, and I can't help but think of combat teams and paratrooper boots jumping out of airplanes. So I know that's not what you mean. It's when audit work is conducted on site where the activities are taking place. Though sometimes there's hesitation to go with that approach due to travel costs, even if they're minimal. Can you help us to understand when it's the right approach to take?
Sarah, as auditors, we have a strong desire for firsthand observation, mostly because we know this is the most effective way to get to the root of understanding. So while some situations, primarily data-driven audits, can be effectively conducted remotely, in most cases, we feel like we're much more effective in digging deeper and gaining a better understanding when we are face-to-face with the firsthand circumstances.
I can certainly see the value in the boots on the ground approach, which also helps to engage the groups you've highlighted in the green circles: finance, procurement, the vendor, and operations. We hear it time and time again in large or decentralized organizations, challenges engaging finance and operations groups, each with their already busy schedules. Are there some approaches your team has used to overcome this?
Sarah, my experience is the most important way to ensure streamlined audit activities is to start by hiring seasoned auditors. Some larger firms use greenhorns. We've heard that in some cases this creates a lot of problems. At PRGX, we only hire auditors with at least 10 years of relevant work experience. And this goes a long way to streamlining operations for the auditor and the clients, as well as the suppliers. Another approach we use is to empower self-service. Experienced auditors can be very independent when empowered to do so. An example, we're firm believers that self-service through boots on the ground is a great audit approach. It's ideal because it produces the most insightful first-hand audit observations, but also it minimizes impacts on our clients' personnel.
I love that you use the term greenhorns for the junior level resources who might be less familiar with the nuances of contract compliance, because as you stated, there's a lot to be said for experience. So on this slide, John, I see that it's a little bit different than what I'm used to seeing. Can you help walk us through why the arrows are moving to the left?
Yeah, I threw you a curve there, didn't I? It is a little different, but I think it's a great slide to understand the message. It's very powerful. To me, this is the best illustration today of the power of prevention. And let me just take a second to explain the slide. First, just to highlight the graph's basic construct. The horizontal axis represents time, moving from the left, which is sooner, and the right, which is later. And the vertical axis illustrates increasing value that the program can deliver. And the basic message is pretty simple. By acting more quickly, more proactively, to conduct procedures more timely, working to identify and correct errors, we move the timeline to the sooner end of the axis. When this happens, the value produced from corrective actions increases due to quicker action, which avoids this prolonged value leakage and saves more future costs as a result. So as you can see with our gauges out here on the right, this slide describes a transformation from one which is purely reactive to a more proactive approach. It does transform objectives from solely recovery-based towards prevention and the resulting future cost savings. And finally, this is a transition that illustrates well the PRGX movement from traditional contract compliance auditing to commercial compliance auditing.
That makes a lot of sense, John. I can't help but notice that traditional contract compliance is way out to the right. Can you explain that?
Well, I did mention this earlier. The audits, the traditional contract compliance audits are often performed 2 years after the fact. Clearly, that's a reactive approach. For that reason, and pretty much along the lines of what we've been saying, the value realization dips quite a bit as a result. Through this, collection loss of, let's say, 50 to 75% oftentimes. And the fact that the underlying root causes are either not addressed or are addressed well after the fact, with leakage going unaddressed in the meantime.
And then I see here a variety of other categories of audit approaches which appear to be designed to be more proactive.
Right. These would be examples of major categories of specialized audit approaches. As discussed, techniques that are performed more proactively as soon as the need is identified. We'll talk about those in a minute, but these techniques have all have specific variations, but generally they're all designed to identify and fix problems sooner, all with the intention to begin realizing savings quickly, maximizing value through a more proactive approach.
And John, when it comes to transformation and the shift from traditional contract compliance to next generation commercial compliance, we see in the chart that advanced analytics accelerates things even further. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, that second line is illustrating the expected impact of contract intelligence solutions that we just talked a few minutes ago. As we layer on advanced technology coupled with our expanded methodologies, value is further enhanced. As an example, through the PRGX contract intelligence tools, we'll be able to ingest, extract, normalize, and analyze key commercial terms from thousands of contracts at the push of a button. Aided by advanced technology, our ability to provide exponential additional value through expanded coverage is enabled. And it's pretty easy to see how this technology is going to revolutionize the business.
Absolutely. Advanced analytics certainly helps us drive additional value. Looking at the various audit approaches, what more can you tell us about these?
Well, at the core of all these services still starts with that traditional compliance audit. From there, expanded procedures are considered, including addressing systemic issues identified through the traditional contract audit approach, as well as, focusing in areas where there are the known blind spots, accessing technology to enable access to low-hanging fruit, and focusing in on known high-risk operations. Then we can design and apply proactive, targeted audit approaches from prepayment to accelerated to real-time, all designed to isolate and correct problems sooner and enable greater program returns.
I can see now how this is beginning to move the timeline from traditional approach of auditing 2 or 4 years after the fact to a much more proactive approach. In some cases, even moving the timeline to before the money goes out the door. So we've talked a lot about next generation contract compliance and the shift to a more proactive mindset. Does this mean that traditional contract compliance with a reactive focus would become obsolete?
As I mentioned earlier, definitely not. This is still a great methodology, and it forms the central discovery mechanism for commercial compliance audit as well, which it's a great methodology for a variety of reasons and will always be that, that core service offering. It's a great vehicle for providing in-depth understanding of many breakdowns, and it really leads us to the other problem areas. We know about these blind spots that I've spoken about, but most of these are known and understood. And importantly, the recoveries are still a significant source of value and excellent funding mechanism. So even though this is a reactive approach, it works hand in hand with the proactive approaches. And together, as we discussed earlier, these techniques can drive program value to greater than 5 times just the historical recovery alone.
So John, you've introduced some of these other categories of more proactive procedures, but can you elaborate a bit?
Yep. These are all considered more proactive approaches than traditional contract compliance audits. Some are more proactive than others. This slide is kind of sorted from the top to the bottom, from the most proactive to maybe less proactive. But first is this pre-event auditing, and I gave an example of that earlier, prepayment auditing. It's a great illustration of how this category can, of expanded methodologies can work. And this approach addresses the risk before the leakage occurs. We have other applications of this, for example, doing audits prior to contract awards, or, as we move into new projects and so forth. So this can be applied into under several different variations. The next one we see here is diagnostic audits, and these are also very proactive. These are techniques that address known and targeted problem areas. Oftentimes the deliverable in this area would be a strengthen or corrective action addressed proactively. And examples would be like process and control design audits, or another one that's highly valuable is a contract language diagnostic audit, which can be applied by spend category, so that there can be a specific focus on addressing weaknesses in contract language and addressing those proactively. After that, as we go down the list here, we have accelerated audits. These are also designed to be proactive. The goal here is early audit and corrective action for known high-risk areas, such as situations where we may have a really high-risk supplier with a very complex set of contract terms. We can put them into a quarterly continuous monitoring program so that we're keeping an eye on their billing more proactively. Also, high-risk contract provisions, for example. We know based on experience that cost true-ups, any kind of cost analysis, cost-based billing, and subsequent true-ups to actual costs represent high-risk areas, and we can do those more proactively. Depending on the circumstances, we can do them quarterly, biannually, or at least annually to make sure that any leakage or value recovery opportunities are quickly resolved. And then another way that we've applied these accelerated procedures is in difficult to evaluate provisions. Some contracts we know have total cost of ownership provisions and requirements of suppliers to deliver, or service level agreements that need to be monitored more proactively, and we can do these accelerated procedures to address those. From there, we move into real-time audits. I talked about that a little earlier with the plant turnaround audit. These are often audits where we want to be on site with the boots on the ground, monitoring things as they occur. And these are especially valuable in these chaotic work environments that we talked about. preventing leakage in situations where we know controls often are at risk of going haywire, and to address the issue before the problem occurs and ensure that the billing is submitted correctly. And finally, we have a whole series of other what we call specific risk audit methodologies that can be targeted to known problem areas. This is one where technology can come into play and really go after low-hanging fruit broadly across your supplier spectrum, even reaching into your lower spend suppliers ranges to recapture that value, but also to focus on other high-risk opportunity areas across your supplier base. For example, areas where we see problems that tend to occur repeatedly, let's say, for example, in per diem billings or rebates and so forth. So I think this is not an exhaustive list. This is an illustration of many of the procedures that we have applied in the past, but the key here is to address the risk that we see, the systemic risks that we see in the client environment, and to design a specific approach to root out that risk and address the underlying root cause quickly and proactively so that we stop the leakage quicker and drive the value up as a result. So as you can see, there's a variety of techniques that address risk, not directly evaluated in traditional contract compliance audit. Though through these expanded procedures, we're able to address traditional compliance audit, blind spots, and other high return opportunities, all designed to drive greater program returns.
Those are some great proactive strategies, John. Now, when it comes to addressing smaller issues, often those don't seem as daunting, though I know your team regularly finds million-dollar issues. Can you tell us about a recent one that your team ran into and what they did to mitigate that leakage?
It's true, but these large, complex audits with major value attached to them are significant sources of recoveries and intelligence related to the supplier under audit. But beyond that, they provide great visibility into other systemic organizational problems that need attention, even beyond the specific audit underway. For example, we recently completed an audit of a major MRO supplier where we recovered $1.2 million in historical billing errors, and we identified at least a dozen specific corrective actions needed with that specific supplier, most related to contract language and administration. But in addition to the corrective actions needed for that specific supplier, we also use the learnings to lead us into other more systematic issues that needed attention more broadly across the spectrum of similar suppliers. So based on those leads, we were able to design other expanded procedures to pursue additional value beyond the $1.2 million in direct recoveries, beyond the $5 million in future cost savings related to corrective actions linked to the specific supplier. So based on that example, I think you can now see the exponential multiplier effect. This one audit became the source of corrective actions that eventually will provide the opportunity for direct program value well in excess of $10 million.
Wow, John, that's impressive. I'm sure I'm not the only one starting to understand why this approach can be so much more valuable than just using traditional contract audit approaches. So John, you have me convinced. Commercial compliance auditing offers many opportunities for boosting program value. So what do you mean by this slide when you talk about supercharging results?
Sarah, remember when I said earlier that two similar companies performing the same work can achieve significantly different results based on their program management maturity? This is critically important to understand. Companies that want to seriously supercharge program value must understand the importance of a well-designed and mature program management structure.
That makes sense. Though, can you tell us why it's so important?
Yeah, anyone who has had any involvement in contract audit knows that these programs are complex and multifaceted. There's lots of potential pitfalls awaiting those who are unaware, inexperienced, and just not really quite sure how to proceed. Audit firms can create a lot of havoc if they don't have a sound approach to managing execution risk. So keep in mind, first, we usually are dealing with auditing the largest, most strategic and complex supplier relationships that our clients have. The contracts are complex and interpretive and subject to differing points of view. There are multiple stakeholders with differing motivations and incentives, both internally and externally. And let's face it, nobody really likes to be audited. So all that combined, can create a challenging work environment. So it's pretty easy to see how things could get out of hand without strong program governance. Program structural maturity is the key to supercharging these results. We classify maturity along these 5 key categories along the right-hand side here. When governance is at or near peak maturity, then we'll be supercharging program results.
John, it sounds like there's a lot to be said for the benefits of a mature model. Can you explain the key program maturity categories for us?
Yeah, most importantly, capabilities are advanced when clearly stated, understood, and supported by everyone. So it starts with having clearly stated goals and objectives. It seems simple, but it's oftentimes not something that gets overlooked. So defining success and key performance metrics, I think, are critical to setting the stage for productive work. A governance structure that starts with a strong executive sponsorship. If you're fortunate enough to have a champion for the work, that's also quite beneficial. And then just a clearly defined decision-making protocol within the audit structure. Culture is critical. It's easy to fall down on this one. The key question is everyone internally in the organization align and on board with supporting and promoting the program objectives. Not always the case, and when that happens, it can create underperformance. And then process, it's not just the standard process, but also the exception processes, well-defined, documented, and supported. And then finally, understanding how technology will play a part in the program and helping to advance the program objectives, and making sure that all parties are bought in and understand and agree to that usage. So when companies can focus on advancing the maturity of these specific capabilities, they're really setting themselves up to really maximize the benefit of the program and supercharge their results.
So John, some people listening might be curious to know where they would fit into the maturity model. What are the types of questions you might ask to help your clients understand where their organizations are at?
First and foremost, what do you want out of your audit program? What are your specific objectives? As I said, sometimes our clients aren't that clear on that. Do you budget key metrics and measure success against them? Is there visibility and express support of a key executive aligned to the program goals? Are key decision-making protocols well-defined and documented? Are key program decision makers held accountable and, better yet, incentivized to drive program results? Is there top-to-bottom organizational alignment around program objectives? Are key processes documented and continuously reviewed for improvement? And finally, how can we maximize the use of technology to advance program objectives?
Those are some thought-provoking questions, which I'm sure have a lot of folks on the line thinking about their own situations. It makes sense and seems like it boils down to a couple of key categories: people, process, and technology. So I wanted to circle back to the example you spoke of earlier, where the single audit was responsible for returning over $10 million in program value to your client. Can you expand with a couple examples of how what you learned on that audit led you into other extended audit procedures?
Absolutely. I'll give 2 examples from that earlier audit. First, that was a very complicated contract with lots of opportunities for ongoing billing errors. In addition, we felt the supplier themselves had major system limitations which were impacting their ability to bill in accordance with the contract that they negotiated. So what we did is we decided to put them on an accelerated audit approach, one of those accelerated types that we spoke of earlier. In this case, continuous monitoring. So the plan going forward is that each quarter, for at least 1 year, that we will do the analysis of compliance of their quarterly billing history. And as we perform that continuous monitoring, we'll identify gaps, correct any billing errors, and provide timely feedback to the supplier to ensure that they are working to correct billing errors and moving towards full billing compliance. The goal is that by the end of 4 quarters of continuous monitoring, the supplier is able to bill in full compliance with the contract as negotiated, and there will be no ongoing need for continuous monitoring. The second key learning that led to extended procedures was a recognition that the category of spend, in that particular case MRO supplies, was a high-risk category, and that all key suppliers in this category would benefit from more in-depth scrutiny. Our plan was to perform a diagnostic audit approach, in this case the application of a contract language diagnostic audit, specifically on designated suppliers in that category. So we worked with our client to identify 16 suppliers that to include in the diagnostic study. We created a commercial terms benchmark set of standards specific to this category from which to evaluate and score each of the contracts within that population. Our senior team dissected each contract, specifically focusing on the commercial terms sections of the contract. We provided a deliverable which reflected an overall scoring by supplier, as well as specific areas of need within the population that required immediate attention. So the identified needs were prioritized as well. So it wasn't just immediate, but we prioritized to important, normal, and low priority. And this served as a guideline to our client's procurement team in how to go about working forward to act and address the missing and or below standard contract language, which needed to be changed across those 16 suppliers. So once implemented, these changes certainly will lead to broad corrective action when within this high-risk category to drive better compliance and deliver broad future cost savings.
That's really interesting, John. I think we're all starting to better understand the multiplying power this approach provides. If we think back to the prior slide on the maturity model, it sounds like there's a lot of moving parts. So how do you see people, process, and technology all coming together to make that happen?
Well, I think the key idea here is creating alignment on key program capabilities. When all aspects of the program are perfectly aligned to a common purpose, that's when the magic can happen. Unfortunately, we know that with immature programs, it's not uncommon to have misalignment on some key aspects of program management, and this can have a significant impact on results. And also, so it's a process for motivated companies to work to advance the maturity of their programs over time, seeking to achieve full program realization built around alignment. Experienced audit service providers, as well as are well-versed in helping their clients evolve the maturity of their programs. In the case of PRGX, we have years of experience in helping our clients in this area and are always willing to help our clients build robust, fully realized program management structures.
It makes sense that programs with this many moving parts would benefit from strong structure and maturity. You've presented a lot of great thoughts here, and as we're nearing the end of the formal discussion, as you shared some insights with us around the trends in the marketplace, moving from a reactive to a proactive program, new audit approaches, shifting our organizations along the maturity model, I'm sure there are some on the line that are starting to ask themselves how they can start to take advantage of these ideas. Do you have some thoughts on actionable takeaways our listeners can consider?
Sure. These solutions are no doubt on the cutting edge, and PRGX is the first mover in our industry in this area. We've been making major investments in processing technology and are well positioned to help clients and prospective clients alike to begin to capitalize on these new ways of working. What I would recommend is consider your current contract audit program and ask yourself if you think there's more value that can be gained from new ways of thinking. Specifically consider some of the examples I gave today and ask yourself if some or all of these could apply to your situation. Ask yourself if your program would benefit from emerging technologies, and specifically if you feel as though you could benefit from contract intelligence, which enables broad audit coverage. Consider whether your program could take advantage of some increased focus on program governance and greater structural maturity around program management capabilities. If the answer to some or all these questions is yes, then consider your options for getting the professional guidance needed to help you achieve these goals. As mentioned, PRGX is on the cutting edge of development with many of these emerging trends and stands ready to join willing companies to take advantage of the power of prevention designed to supercharge program results.
This session has really brought about some new ways of thinking and leaves us with a lot of important things to consider as we look to the greatest amount of value we can get from our program. I really appreciate you sharing this with us, John, your subject matter expertise, and now I'll turn it over to the audience for any questions. And looks like, John, we actually have our first question in. The question is, we are in the middle of a plant turnaround. What audit approaches could help us stay on top of a financial exposure?
Well, I used an example earlier, Sarah, of getting auditors into the field and doing firsthand observation of what's happening. As we know, these kind of environments, plant turnaround being a good example, where there's really so much concentrated activity that risk for erroneous billings becomes quite high, and then couple that with the consideration that the amount of dollars being spent during these periods is also quite high. So you can see that the potential for significant overbillings are extremely high. So getting auditors out in advance, on site, doing direct observation in amongst your supplier community is going to be a great approach. And anybody who's interested in that, certainly, we can help with some thinking around how to mobilize that effort, in advance of your next turnaround.
Great, thank you, John. We have another question that's come in. It says, what will be extracted from the contracts using the contract intelligence engine? And John, I can take that one if you want.
Sure.
So the contract intelligence engine extracts a few things from the contracts. The first being the basic information like contract name, number, execution date, and so forth. Then it also extracts rate tables that were found, so we can turn those into the data that's used in our risk identification tools. And then third, it extracts the risky commercial terms. So for those risky terms, it not only captures them, it classifies them into certain risk groups and assigns a risk score, as well as then can generate a cumulative risk score for the contract itself across all of the risky language that it identified. Looks like we actually have another one in. This one says, we have a relatively mature contract compliance team. If we wanted to start doing more proactive audits, what's the best place to start?
And I think this is something we see with a lot of our existing clients. And as I mentioned earlier, the ones that are more forward-thinking are starting to realize that there definitely is more that they could get out of the work that's already being done. And so I think what's important is to work with your existing audit service provider who has experience in this area. Obviously, PRGX is one of those companies, and start to isolate, the systemic and gain a deeper understanding of where systemic risk exists in your organization, and then how to apply, those various techniques that we talked about earlier in a way that is directly aligned to your own organization with an eye towards driving the highest return on investment. So obviously there's costs associated with that kind of expanded procedure, but when evaluated against the risk and the the potential for significant future cost savings, the return on investment of that additional effort can be substantial, many times over again what the additional cost would be. So I think the key there is really teaming with experienced service provider, and then together looking for that systemic risk and defining which of those extended procedures might apply in your work environment, and then working to build a program or project that goes out and addresses that need, and then to circle back and evaluate how successful the effort was in delivering the value proposition that was promised.
Great, thank you, John. And I think that's all of our questions, so I'll turn it back over to Ashley. Thank you everyone for joining our webinar today.
Great, thanks Sarah. Well, thank you both for taking the time to speak around contract audits and answer these questions today. And again, we want to thank you all for joining us on today's webinar. This recording will be added to the PRGX website, and the slides presented will also be available. And please share this webinar if you know anyone else who may find this content useful. If you'd like to speak with a PRGX expert on contract compliance, please get in touch with us by email at marketing@prgx.com or with our contact us webpage, prgx.com/contact. Thank you for joining us today.